Welcome to Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss. 60 minutes upcoming of deliciousness. Kids Cook Everything is the latest book from Mark Bittman and also his first book for kids. Bittman is the author of more than 30 books, including the New York Times bestsellers How to Cook Everything and How to Cook Everything Vegetarian. He hosts the Food with Mark Bittman podcast, and his team's weekly The Bittman Project posts are an absolute must read. I have to tell you that I read them every week. They're so full of information. And so, Mark, I just want to say welcome. Thanks very much for stopping by and visiting with me.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I was talking with a friend yesterday, and she was describing the difficulties has in the kitchen. And these difficulties range from never having the right ingredients to for what she wanted to cook, for not feeling competent, to do what she envisions. And
This is a true story, right?
yes, this is
Okay.
this is yesterday. And
Okay.
while I'm talking to her, it suddenly hit me that, oh my gosh, Kids Cook Everything is specifically designed to empower kids in the kitchen, but why? Why? There's no reason to limit that. It's a great starting place for anybody. And if you're a parent, it's perfect for learning how to make great food together. So it was like a real, I'm sure I would have gotten there eventually, but she really opened my eyes to like, oh wow, there's a lot of stuff in this book.
I was laughing because I always used to say, as cooks, we always have excuses. We're always making compromises. And I used to say exactly what your friend said. We never have the right ingredients. We don't have the skills. Our knives aren't sharp. We don't have enough time. We never have enough time. And yet, once you're cooking, once you learn how to cook, none of that stuff matters. I mean, it matters, but you just make do because cooking is a compromise. Unless you're a chef with an army of 20 people, then you're compromising, always compromising. So it's good to start off knowing that you're not going to be perfect. And, all the great cooking teachers have said that. The real ones, not the ones who are training chefs, but the Julia Childs of the world of all. So, and then the second thing you said, which is also very funny, because I didn't know it until the book came out. I mean, what I did know is we did not design a book that would say, here, parents, give this book to your 10-year-olds and tell them to cook you dinner. That was never the intention. We had long, long discussions about whether this was cooking with kids or cooking for kids or having kids cook or what. And so we've obviously settled on a sort of compromise model, but it is cooking with kids. And hopefully it's cooking with kids stuff they'll like. But so many people have said to me, oh God, this is perfect for me. It's just like it explains everything. Because all cookbooks, like cooking, all cookbooks are compromises. You don't know whether you have to tell people what boiling water means. I mean, you can sort of assume that, but with kids, you can't even assume that. So you have to spell everything out, and that makes it a different kind of book. I mean, the illustrations, I should say, the fabulous illustrations, and the photographs make it clear that it's a kid's book, but the text doesn't really make it clear that it's a kid's book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I noticed is that it speaks to me in a real positive way, which I'm sure it speaks to kids. It's direct how it's written, and it's all about approaching things from a simple level, but not dumbing them down because, oh, well, they're kids, that kind of thing.
I mean, exactly. But again, it's really a book for parents. I mean, it's a book for parents to say, here's a way to spend time in the kitchen with your kid or kids. And that's an important thing to do. So it's written for parents and illustrated for kids. I mean, it's the idea is to enchant the kid into wanting to do this. But let's face it, most 8-year-olds are not that good in the kitchen, and they're not gonna be, and they don't have they have the attention span of a gnat. So, there's the exceptional kid. I was at a signing the other night, and there were, a couple of kids came up to me and they're like, I can't wait to cook from this. I've been cooking for years. And they're this tall. They're 7 or they're 9, and they're totally into it. But most kids, I mean, my idea is to get kids familiar with what it feels like, what it smells like, what it looks like, what the tools are, blah, 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 what the process is of cooking, so that when they're older, it doesn't scare them, like your friend, like all these people who are afraid of cooking. And it's really important to be able to cook.
Mhm. So I was wondering because your grandkids are a part of this, and also at least what, two of your daughters or one of your
I
daughters?
have two daughters and
Right.
two grandsons.
So how did they inspire you in relation to this project?
Um, the older one, especially, who's got the older child. I mean, both my kids, who are grown women, are really good cooks, and I think, I like to think they're really good cooks because they hung out in the kitchen while I was cooking, and they liked it. But it wasn't like they were budding chefs, as they used to say. They were just people, young people cooking. And again, I think that's the idea. And Kate, my older daughter, just kept saying we should really do a book for kids. We should do a book, and so the inspiration is really Holden, her son, who was probably 4 when we started on this. He's almost 9 now. So, um, it was, and really, he's not. He's a terrible example of this because we did some videos together and we did some cooking together for the book, and there's a little arm twisting going on. It's like, come on, Holden, I need you to help me. He's not, he's not a kid who quote unquote wants to be a chef. Um, but he's gonna grow up knowing what kitchens look like and what they feel like and what his mom goes through and his dad do, what I go through to put food on the table. And I think that's a very valuable thing. I'll just talk about my mother for 1 second. I mean, I could talk a lot about my family history, and I don't even think it's that interesting. But the one thing that I think I could say quickly that is of some value is that my mother is not a great cook. She wasn't particularly interested in cooking. She wasn't a great eater. She didn't, and later years she came to appreciate food more. And I'd like to think I can take some credit for that. But when I was a kid, she was obligated to put food on the table at every meal, and she did it. I'm not saying she liked it. I'm not saying there weren't issues around it. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying she walked into the kitchen, she did what she had to do, she left. And that for me was a blessing because I saw that that happened. And I saw that that was a part, I learned that that was a part of everyday life. She was resentful about it. There were things about it she didn't like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was her job. Um, and she did it. And she didn't do it badly. She didn't do it especially well, um, either, but she did it. And I just grew up thinking at 5 o'clock, 5:30, whatever in the afternoon, in the early evening, you go in the kitchen and you make something. And I honestly, that's, if you want to talk about environmental determinism or whatever, that had a big impact on me.
Yeah, I understand that, especially going to get into it a little bit later, but especially in relation to how many people are growing up in this country, this past generation, the current generation, that type of thing, which is another reason that I love this book. And I know that there'll be people who will get the book and go, I don't have time for this. There's no way.
Mhm,
I don't have
mhm.
time. So great.
Sure.
Start with one meal a week.
Right.
And
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt.
I mean, how I actually should need to ask you, how would you suggest people approach the book?
I don't think 20 years ago, I wrote a thing called Cooking Solves Everything. And I really believed that. And I really thought that. But you know what? There are people who don't want to cook. They shouldn't be forced to. There are people who don't have the time to cook. They don't have the time to cook. There are people who don't have kitchens. I mean, there's a lot of people who, for a variety. And as you just said, the world has changed. Society has changed. Our grandparents, whatever, our grandparents, great grandparents were the last generation in America for sure who lived at a time when the majority of people were farmers and when people were really attached to the land. My grandparents were immigrants and city people. So they were a generation that they grew up on or near the land, but by the time they were in their 40s or 50s, they had no interest in any of that. It all came from the supermarket. And my generation grew up probably the first generation where everything was pretty much industrially produced. Junk food was coming of age, fast food started, et cetera, et cetera. Things are different now. People expect, and I'm not even sure it's a bad thing, but people expect to be able to eat whenever, wherever, however, without cooking. So that's not ideal. I think it's in a way helpful for us to get on with our lives, and as humans we're transitioning into whatever the future brings us, and it'll change again. But some percentage of people are always going to cook and will want to cook and will take pleasure in it and will understand the value of it and will have the time and will have the money and all of that stuff. That's who this is for. If you're afraid of cooking but you want to do it, this book is good. I mean, this is really, yeah, once a week, every once in a while. I cooked with someone the other day and said, I'll see you in 2 weeks because we're going to do this every 2 weeks, which was not true, but that would be really fun. Um, if you think you don't like cooking, I think it's worth trying. If you can't, that's a different story. It is not, I used to be very strident about this. You can't be. Um, but you can show people what's possible and then let them choose whether they want to do it or not.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd like to actually read some things from the book, just some very short things that I think capture a lot of the important points in the book. You write, cooking is going to change the way you think about food. You know what you like to eat. I want cooking to be an activity that you love, one that lets our creativity shine, and most important, stay safe and have fun. And one more thing right now, here's an excerpt from the introduction. But the most important tool for tasting and eating will always be your mouth. Your mouth will tell you if something is crunchy or creamy, soggy in a good way or soggy in a bad way, or too salty or not salty enough. But it's not just your mouth. You'll use your ears to hear food sizzling and bubbling, your nose to sound the alarm when something is burning, and your eyes to decide when something is cooked exactly the way you like it.
Mm.
Don't worry if you don't know how to do this yet. The more you cook, the better you'll be at using your senses to know when the food is right for you. I just that speaks to any cook, kid, adult, whatever.
Yeah, it does. And so much of it is a bad experience. I mean, you learn how to cook and you learn the smell stuff and the sight stuff, um, which are in a way, even the sound. Those three things are in a way the trickiest part. Obviously, you're using your eyes, and you're using timers, you're using your hands, and so on. But once you cook for a while, you develop these senses. Some of them are a more acute sense of smell or the ability to recognize smells, the ability to see what things look like. Um, the first time someone tells you to heat oil until it shimmers, you don't know that it means exactly, but it becomes clear pretty quickly, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. And even hearing, but then also that sort of spidey sense of, yeah, I better get up and look at this, or, it's really time to do that. It just becomes second nature. And that some of that happens quickly, some of it takes a while, but um I do think that if kids get started on that, then I mean, I have met, again, to go back to my childhood, when kids were cooking when I was young, it was either girls in cooking class while boys were in shop class, or it was us messing around in the kitchen, like mixing peanut butter and Hershey syrup and apple juice or something in a glass and stirring it up and seeing what happened. But now the kids do cook, and plenty of kids help their parents, and plenty of kids by the time they're 12 or 14 are some are doing really fancy stuff, and some are doing normal everyday cooking. They cook one night a week for their families, whatever. This is geared toward turning kids into those kind of people who are comfortable in the kitchen, who are not afraid, who take joy in what they're able to do and um, their ability to do it. Yeah,
You give some great examples for all these different, the use of the senses. I love the popcorn one, for example, because the pot's covered, right? You can't
right,
see what's going on, right? So you have to use other senses.
right. I'm sometimes really I'm older. My sense of smell is not. I used to walk into a room and be able to identify half the ingredients that we're cooking. It just like, oh yeah, so there's this, there's that. Now, yesterday my partner walked into the kitchen and said, God, this smells amazing. I couldn't smell, I didn't even smell it. But um I think my sense of hearing, I can glance at things, that spidey sense I talked about, just sort of knowing that's become those senses have become enhanced and it's easier in a way. Those will decline also, and we'll see, but I certainly intend to keep cooking. I'll figure it out. You don't even really, once you've cooked a while, you don't even need to know how stuff tastes because you know how to do it.
I think that another thing that is critical in the message that you are communicating is that these are formative years when kids are young. And like you said, if they're in the kitchen with their parents at that time and they're getting used to these things, and also the book has such a wide palette that's part of it that I know so many people who grew up with such a limited palette, and they're
Sure.
still that way today. They
Yeah.
have such a small world of flavor, and I just feel like that they're just missing out. And so the kids who get exposed to this are going to be exposed to a much broader world than, for example, I was when I was growing up.
Yeah. I think that's true. And saying it is about it is about exposure, but it's also yeah. And again, without being preachy,
Mhm.
to the extent that kids get used to handling real ingredients, being around real ingredients, recognizing them and so on, they are going to eat better. And if we want a generation of healthy grown-ups, then we have to raise a generation of healthy kids. And one of the ways to raise a generation of healthy kids is to coax them into the kitchen. And again, I mean, we're saying being a little repetitive, but it is about getting kids comfortable with cooking and comfortable with the ingredients that go into real ingredients that go into cooking. I mean, this book, Kids, is more forgiving than my other books. I think I said already, it's not preachy. I'm much less strident than I normally am. I think, my life as an opinion writer and as a food advocate leads me to stridency sometimes, but I think with kids, you want to be more forgiving. You just want to try to coax them into seeing that real food is good and worth doing. But there are go back to compromises. There's cornflakes as an ingredient in here, and there's more use of ketchup and sugar and stuff that I would ordinarily try in a book geared toward grown-ups. I would, not only try to steer away from, but um coach against. All my books have sugar in them, and I've written articles in praise of ketchup. Those are perhaps not the best examples, but it's the balance of things and the sort of just go cook something. I mean, there's not a recipe for Rice Krispie treats, but it's a little more in that direction than other things that I've done.
Yeah, maybe in terms of you're putting in that context and other things you have done, but it's not I would call it the typical book that's written for kids to learn about things in the kitchen, where there's so much done with let's hide, here's how you can hide
Yeah,
vegetables.
yeah,
You know, and all kinds of funny things. Yeah, there's some there you've got frosting and you've got some other desserts, but it's full of there's technique, right? You call it creamy rice with butter and cheese, but it's risotto. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
the whole, I mean, come on. Tuna potato chip pot pie, but you're teaching them how to make a bechamel sauce.
yeah, yeah. That we did that. I'm trying to remember what kid we did that with last week.
I love it. I
We
mean,
did it on TV actually. We did it on the wasn't a kid, it was Drew Barrymore. Um, but yeah, I was like, yep, we're doing bechamel. That is what we're not calling it that, but that's what it is. Yep, you do need to brown that flour. Well, that's the thing. As I said, it's not, you're not handing a book to an 8-year-old and saying, go in the kitchen and do this. You're handing the book to the parent and saying, you can learn something, but even if you know it already, you can teach this to your kid. But kitchen, we have to have respect for the kitchen. It's not just this place where you throw stuff together. Um, there's knives, there's fire, there's places, there's dangerous things everywhere. Or yeah, they are dangerous. And we need to teach kids respect for that stuff. We need to teach them to be careful. I don't think the right thing to do is to just throw the kid into the kitchen. I think we need to show them what to do.
yeah, I want to actually just bring up a couple of examples of things that I learned when I was looking at this. I have to find it in my notes. Um, so I never thought about it making quesadillas. I mean, I always use two tortillas, it's like, and you're saying, well, come on. If you use one, you can, the cheese is going to melt easier and you can fold it over, and it gets crispier. And I'm like, oh yeah. That was,
There's
go ahead. Yeah.
no, there's some innovation in there. I mean, it took this book wasn't put together in 6 weeks. It took a while. We had to think about this. And, if also if you look at my background in cookbook writing, it's gone from, I mean, the first book I did was way more comprehensive than what we're doing now. And the second book I did was How to Cook Everything, which obviously is something of a Bible. We had to be more selective. Everybody who does cookbooks has to be more, or should be more careful about their recipe selection because so much of the book is taken up with photographs. And in this case, so much of the book is taken up with illustrations as well. And thirdly, the recipes are longer because we are explaining how to do things that most grown-ups know how to do already. So we had to make sure the recipe selection was really good, that the recipes were, each recipe has to do some work on its own part to support this book.
Mhm.
Because it's not a lesson book. It's a cookbook. It's a like here's how to cook, but it's not. We will start with boiling water and we move on to scrambling eggs and then we'll make pancakes. It's not like that.
Mhm. But there is some teaching, like I never knew what smushing was, but now I'm going to try it.
Right.
So,
We had these kids crushing cornflakes the other day, and the instructions of the book are use the back of a cup or use if you have a meat mallet or use this or that or your hands. And the kids were trying all these different things. And I was like, really, if I was writing this recipe now, I'd be like, use your hands because it's the easiest thing. And then it was fun and it worked really well also. Yeah.
and the smushing technique for the grilled cheese is putting some type of weight on top of it, right?
Well, now turns out they make those weights. They didn't used to make those weights, but thanks to the smash burger phenomenon, now everybody has to have one of those weights so they can make a squished hamburger.
Mhm.
Smushed hamburger, I guess I should say.
And there's there's a lot of fun in this, even though it's not. I'm going to take a little bit of umbrage with you in relation to the illustrations. I mean, I really found them very engaging. Maybe that says something about my maturity. I don't know. But
I
I
think the illustrations are amazing. They're
right.
really amazing. Um, I don't know. Yeah, we're doing a couple of events this week. I'm not going to broadcast them because they're kind of private, I guess, but we're doing a couple of events this week with the illustrator. She and I, or April and I, are
Nice.
on stage together because I mean, the book is great. I'm not a big visual person. You look at How to Cook Everything, it's like blocks and blocks of gray matter. But this is spectacular stuff. Her stuff is imaginative and creative, and yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah. And then there's, the way that you will say, instead of blocks of gray matter, you have the illustrations, but you also have all of these tutorials, I'll call them, organized tutorials that are pretty straightforward and simple to digest on so many different topics, like how to prep many foods for cooking, spices and herbs, condiments, decorating your soup bowl, vegetables your way, build a bowl, cream it, beat it, whip it, fold it. I mean, it's like I said, this is a I'm going to start recommending this book for every adult who doesn't know how to cook.
Well, it is a book in the How to Cook Everything series after all, and we did. Um, I don't claim to have invented anything, but when a little 27-year-old anecdote, no, yeah, 98, what's that, 26-year-old anecdote. When I worked on the first How to Cook Everything 90% by myself, maybe even 95% by myself, until I had a manuscript, and it took years. And the publisher was changing, the editors were changing, everything was changing. I just kept working on it. It took a long time, needless to say. And then I sent it, and then I finally had a brilliant, wonderful, the woman who finished the book with me, editor. And she took the job and she said, "What do I have here?" Because the manuscript, this was back in the day when you had to print things out. There was no email yet. There wasn't email of big documents yet. Um, and she said, "What do I have here?" And I said, "I think what you have is the backbone or the skeleton of a really good basic cookbook, but it's not, it's missing some stuff, and I'm not sure what it is." And we put together a team at that point of three people. She and I and uh, another editor we hired. And that's when we started doing those lists and those explainers and those sidebars and all that kind of stuff, which, you see the lineage of that, or the descendancy of that here. And like I said, we didn't invent anything, but putting all of that plus the illustrations in the original How to Cook Everything um, was what turned it into something that was really special, I think. And part of that was because I was in the magazine, working in the magazine world at that time. So it's very magazine-y to have sidebars, obviously, but it's stuck, and I've done it ever since.
And actually, one of the parts that's like that I love in this book is all of the recipe variations.
Yeah, I can't get away from that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that actually, my first book was called Fish, and arguably still in print, came out in 96. Um, Maybe 94. Amazing that I can't remember. It could be the 30th anniversary of Fish. Um, that book arguably took me 12 years to write. I mean, that is 10 years to do all the research, 6 months to sell it to a publisher, and a year to actually produce it. But it was, how like the band's first album is the best kind of thing, or has their most interesting ideas. And that book, and Fish, I had recipes with variations, much, much more limited than How to Cook Everything. But it started before that. I'm not sure how. I mean, there are old cookbooks with recipes and variations, and I guess I just liked that style. It never made sense to me to say, here's how to broil cod with tomatoes, and then the next page it would be, here's how to broil cod with capers and onions, and they're the same recipe, you just changed a couple of ingredients. And then the third page is, olives. And so like I said, I don't take credit for inventing anything, but I did like that. I did like the notion. I've always liked the notion of just saying, let me show you how to make a vegetable soup, and then I'll tell you 20 different things you could do to make it into 20 different vegetable soups instead of here's 20 vegetable soup recipes.
Yeah, and you do that in this book. There's a exactly there's a vegetable soup recipe in here, but you do say that if you only learn one recipe in this book, it needs to be beef and vegetable stir fry. Can you explain all that, please?
I mean, I think that there are three or four really, really fundamental recipes that if you know those and you don't know anything else, you're kind of okay. And I'll say what they are, and then I'll talk about the stir fry. I do think soup is, you know, key. Obviously, you can make soup in many, many different ways, but just the idea that you can take that sort of stone soup children's story, the idea that you can take a pot of water and add whatever you have to it and turn it into something to eat, that's pretty cool. So that's one. Chopped salad is another. Instead of thinking of salad as lettuce, when you start thinking, and we've done that, you know, culturally, we've learned this. You say, what can I put in this bowl? It kind of doesn't matter. Is it going to taste good? That's You can eat one of those a day and be happy. Um, rice and beans, because rice or rice and beans, which we could think of as grains and legumes, because whole grains are the fundamental essential source of carbohydrates, that is calories, for almost everyone on earth, and beans are the fundamental source of protein for 70% of the world's population, some large percentage of the world's population. And before I wrote policy and before I wrote opinion, when I was quote unquote just a cookbook writer, um, I used to say if I could get everybody in the United States to eat rice and beans once a week, I would have had an amazing career. And I haven't done that. I have had an amazing career, but I haven't done that particular thing. But rice and beans, because it's easy, because you know you can learn how to cook all of that stuff in advance, because you can make it taste so many different ways, but more important because those are really the fundamental ingredients of the world's diet. And then stir fry, because like soup and like chopped salad, you can kind of do anything you want. But the technique is cool, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this. It kind of tastes better. Like when you cook things fast on a high heat, you get these results that people like. Like you get crispy, hot stuff with a little bit of fat on it and a lot of flavor. And soup is not going to do that. Soup's got a different appeal. Rice and beans are not going to do that. And chopped salad is certainly not going to do that. Here's where you get, you know, your all your umami, and you know, normally we think of stir fry as Chinese, and so you're using soy sauce and ginger and garlic and chilies and all that kind of stuff. You can do a stir fry, you can use the technique for anything, but just that sort of idea that you cut things into small pieces and you cook them really fast and you make them taste really great, and you can use kind of anything, and it is by its nature, everything I've mentioned here is by their natures, are by their natures, whatever, vegetable heavy, and stir fry goes for that also. And then, you know, 20 years ago, I used to say it's not it's not as important for the Chinese to learn to eat like Americans as it is for Americans to learn to eat like Chinese. It hasn't quite worked out that way. It's our diet that's taking over the world, unfortunately. But stir fry is such a great way to cook, such a great way to use what's in the refrigerator, such a great way to make a lot out of a little, um, and to incorporate animal products into a dish without using a lot of them, without doing potato, meat and potatoes kind of thing.
Mhm, mhm. Another insight that I wanted to pass along to our audience because it was one that really made me happy. And that was really a
Uh,
simple one, especially around holiday time. People are doing a lot of hors d'oeuvres, for example, dips. And you wrote some vegetables you don't like raw will taste better cooked until crisp, tender, and chilled, like broccoli, cauliflower, snow, and snap peas. The reason I
right.
love that is because there seems to be an understanding that exists generally that those vegetables can be served raw, and and I don't think they're very enjoyable that way. So I
Well,
loved reading that.
I grew up in an era where, or not grew up, but in my 20s, there was a big raw food trend. And I think that's when people started eating raw broccoli, which is, it can be enjoyable in its way. You got to cut it into small pieces. Um, but parboiled and chilled and served with oil, lemon, so then it becomes amazing. And some things like, snow and snap peas are a good example because it's fun to eat them raw, but they're starchy when they're raw, and when you cook them, they're sweet, and it's a big difference.
One of the other things that you do in the book that we've kind of touched on, but you repeatedly point out how you can easily make your own better tasting versions of things that in our current society we just
We
pick up.
buy,
Right, we buy.
yeah,
We buy. So, you've got honey mustard sauce, you've got salad dressing of any kind, but especially, including ranch dressing. Um, Cooking your own beans, you already mentioned beans, cooking your own beans for burritos because you're right, basically. I know you can use a can, but do this, it's going to taste a lot better.
right.
And then chicken nuggets, I saw somebody from PBS, you did those
Yeah,
with
that was just like 5 days ago. I was in Washington. We did that.
Yeah. So your own chicken nuggets are going to taste a lot better than chicken nuggets that you're going to
Yeah, those were good.
get out.
I
Yeah.
think vinaigrette is really well, it's like the things we were just talking about. It's a fundamental and key thing. And sure, ranch dressing is a miracle when you make it at home, but the sort of oil vinegar mustard or oil vinegar mustard garlic or oil vinegar shallot, tarragon mustard, whatever you want to do, when you learn how to make a vinaigrette, there's just no going back. I
Mhm.
can't, I just can't believe that anyone who sees how simple it is to make a vinaigrette would then go buy Wishbone. No offense to Wishbone, I grew up on it. And kind
Yeah.
of the same
Both those
thing,
are good. Or good seasons, one of those two.
right? Kind of the same. Well, I remember when they started selling those. Is that those packages where
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
My mother
The,
wasn't into that. She
the
said
little cruet.
Wishbone. Yeah, they'd sell you the little or give you the little cruet. Um, I mean, same with beans. During COVID, I bought a bunch of canned beans because I was like, I just gotta have them around, and they're still sitting there because I cook my own beans all the time. And I know we don't deal with this really in the kids' book, but for people who have an instant pot, which I hope is not one of those appliances that people buy and then stick in the cupboard and forget about because you know, for whole grains and for beans, that thing, pressure cookers are are miracles. You can just cook beans from scratch and be done in 30, 40 minutes. And brown rice and other whole grains too, 20 minutes. And yeah, it's what cookbooks are for. It's or to teach people this stuff because they're not going to intuit it. Someone's got it.
Mhm.
But once you're into it and once you're doing it, it really is it's pretty easy.
I wonder if we could just talk for a few minutes about a little bit tangentially to the book. I want to ask you where you are today, because I know that your thinking has evolved quite a lot over the decades that you've been doing this. And do you think that people are more I didn't
It's just fun. It just
wait a
is
minute.
like I'm an elder statesman, it's pretty funny.
Well, I think we're both probably in about the same place. So, do you feel like there is more awareness about food these days, or do you feel like we're still preaching to the same small group of people?
No, I the first. We're not. We're not preaching to as many people as we should be preaching to, or not that many people have heard the sermon, but sorry, not enough people have heeded the sermon. But I teach at the Public Health School at Columbia, and I teach a course that never could have existed 20 years ago, and even 10. And I see, and this is not a cooking course. The course is called Food, Public Health, and Social Justice. It's got almost nothing to do with cooking, although it's a very international, multi-culti crew, and at the last class is always a potluck. So
Mhm.
we do that. But these students who are mostly in their 20s come into this class knowing 10 times as much as I knew about food, even when I was a food writer 20, 30 years ago. There's a, you know, the, not to get too political, but well, I'm allowed to do what I want, right?
That's especially on this show.
You know, we've got a slightly more than slightly erratic, um, perhaps unreliable nominee for Health and Human Services talking about food now. And, you know, although I don't know why I'm being shy, although the vaccine stuff and some of the other things RFK talks about just seem completely off the wall, the food stuff he's saying, everybody knows that's right. The, the, the anti ultra processed food conversation has advanced so far that even wacky Republican nominees are talking about that. So that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. And the term ultra processed food wasn't even in common usage. I mean, we talked about junk food, but hardly anyone talked about what can we do to limit the spread of junk food. Um, so unquestionably, more people know more stuff about food. Are they eating better? That's a different question and a sadder answer, I think. But part of the reason many people don't eat better is that they can't afford it. And the reason they can't afford it is because our food system is run entirely for profit and with almost no consideration to people's health or the planet's health. That's my work. I mean, I'm not saying the kids' book's not important. The kid book is critically important because we want to raise kids understanding this stuff. That's the message. The message is the food system needs to be for the benefit of all people, um, and with an attempt to try to preserve the planet rather than extract from it. And that's a big change. That's not going to happen in our lifetimes. Um, but that's the work that has to be done. That's the important stuff. And by the way, thank you for letting me do that because it is tangential.
It's okay. So do you see this is where your attention is going to continue to be focused over the next number of years? Is this what's really driving you right now?
Yeah, I love the cookbooks, and uh, I'm not sure what happens next with cookbooks, but there's a lot of material in the archive that can be reintroduced and reworked and made contemporary. I mean, if you look at old cookbooks, I mean, they're awful, even mine. I mean, they're like the presentation is terrible. And I've had to cook everything came out tomorrow. I think people would laugh at it. I mean, it's just so gigantic. So there's work to be done. And I do think that I no longer think that cooking is the solution to our food system's problems, but I think that okay, this will take a minute. But it's a sort of a theory of change. And the theory of change is that you can change comes about in two ways. You can make bad things less bad, and that's important. Um, and then you can model new things that sort of don't exist, and that's important also. Cookbooks are kind of a model for how you want to teach people to cook and how you try to get them to fall in love with food. They're an old model, but they're super useful. And the goal of cookbooks is to get people to throw away their cookbooks because even though you've got 50 of them sitting behind you. I bet you don't need any of them.
Oh, wow.
Um, but then the bigger models is my sort of passion projects right now are or my real passion project is this thing called Community Kitchen, which is going to be a nonprofit restaurant that sources great food, makes sure the people who bring us food are treated right, cooks plant forward food, kind of like that stir fry we were talking about, food that might or might not include animal products, but in a more sensible proportion than most Americans are used to, and then makes that food accessible to everybody through a sliding scale or progressive payment plan or whatever you want to call it. That is by necessity a nonprofit because you can't make money doing that, but it's a model of how it would be a model of what things might look like, what one aspect of the food system might look like if we were doing things right with our population's interest at heart rather than the interest of shareholders in a corporation at heart.
Are you optimistic?
Wendell Berry, I asked Wendell Berry that question one time, and he said, "I'm not optimistic, I'm hopeful."
Hmm.
Um, Splitting hairs, maybe. I don't know. Whenever anyone asks me that question, I go quote Wendell Berry. Um, I'm optimistic, but I'm not optimistic in the short term. I'm nothing in the short. I'm agnostic in the short term, especially now. There's not a soul in this country who knows what's going to happen in the next 6 months, and anyone who says they do is wrong. So it's a scary time, and an odd time, and an interesting time to be, as if speaking as if I weren't invested in it. It's fascinating. So I'm not optimistic in the short term, and I don't have, I only have 20 or at the outside 30 years to live, which is not that long a time. But I do think that I I do believe that the pendulum of history is toward progress, but it goes in fits and starts. And you might live at a time, if you were born in 19 if you were born in 1895, you might have fought in two world wars and lived through a depression. You might have gotten rich at the same time, but that was a tough period to be alive. You and I have lived in a kind of, especially, as white men, have lived in a kind of peaceful time. And if we're lucky, we get to live the rest of our days that way. But things go back and forth. And, what's good for us personally is not necessarily what's good for the country or the world. I am optimistic about what happens after I'm dead, and maybe I'll get to see a little of it, but kind of doesn't matter, is the point, I guess. You just feel like it's not good enough right now. My job is to try to make it better. I'd like to have some impact that I can live to see, and whatever I don't live to see will happen afterwards. And, that whole thing about we stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us. Well, our shoulders are going to be there also for other people to stand on. So it's a chain. I think to the extent you can see history and progress without taking it too personally and being quaking with fear about your own death, I think, yeah, I mean, we're all dirt. It's not untrue. We have a little bit of time that we can try to make it better for people who come after us.
I want to tell you something really fast because I know you have to go and we've got to
I
wrap up.
do. Yeah, I have 7 minutes. I have a meeting at 4.
Okay. So, do you know Fred Kirshenman? Do you know?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So
He's
I was
actually my partner's. I would say he's a mentor of my partner. I know him.
okay. So after I finished talking with him once, I said to him, "How do you stay so optimistic?" Because if you know, he's always, well, at least when I've been around him, he's always smiling and and for those people who aren't familiar with Fred,
Got
he's
to be 90, Fred, at this point,
yeah,
doesn't he?
yeah, yeah. And he's an organic farmer for decades, and he was the head of the Leopold Center at Iowa State when it existed, which of course it doesn't exist any longer. We don't need to go into that. And he also was the president of Stone Barns Foundation in New York. Um, Anyway, I asked him this.
He's only 89. I got it
I was,
wrong.
oh, okay. So he said to me, he said, if you get conventional farmers together in a group and you talk to them about what the needs are moving forward in terms of our climate, our ecology, our nutrition, all those things, they just look at you like you're totally out of your mind and you don't know what you're talking about, and on and on and on, following a standard type of line. He said, without a doubt, whenever I've talked one-on-one with any of those farmers, every one of them has told me that they know what they're doing is not sustainable.
Right.
So that's why I kind of try to remember that every time when I get a little bit, we'll say upset about the situations that we see, whether it's in the food world or in other parts of our world. So I want to just say thank you for sharing all that. I really
Uh,
do.
yeah. One other thing that's tangential or in accord with what you just said is I think another friend of mine who would consider Fred a mentor, who was at Leopold and has known Fred for way longer than I have. Um, Says that when you get farmers together now, they say, we realize that we don't have the knowledge to farm well. That farming is um, a knowledge-based operation. It's a profession, and I know a couple farmers really well, and one of them always says, you only have 40 years to get this right because that's all the summers you've got as an active farmer. And we've made it harder and harder for farmers to really learn how to farm by taking a lot of it out of their hands. And yeah, I know Fred would agree. Fred would agree with that. And part of making things better, part of changing the food system for the better is returning farming to uh, its place as a dignified profession and encouraging people to get into that. There's a lot of work to be done. That's a simple statement. There's a lot to be done to make that actually happen. And just before people get the wrong idea, I'm not talking about farming the way we farmed in the 20s, 1920s, or in the 1850s or anything like that. I'm talking about a different kind of farming, but it is still a knowledge-based, dignified, hard work, but super interesting profession. And if we can, there was a time when 25% of the people in the United States were farmers and more than 50% of people lived on farms. We're not going back to that. When we get 5 or 10% of us farming, that would be really, really an amazing thing.
Can you tell people just very briefly about the Bittman Project?
So the website, which is called the Bittman Project, then is found at bittmanproject.com, or if you don't want to remember that, markbittman.com will work also. And it's run largely by my daughter Kate. Obviously, I'm involved, as are half a dozen other people. And we are just trying to look at food from every angle. And again, I appreciate what you've done here. I appreciate the way you've conducted this interview because we've done that. We started off talking about cooking for kids, and we ended up talking about farming. We ended up talking about how to change the food system and why that's important. So we try to do all of that on the site, and we have a newsletter that comes out 3 times a week, sometimes four. We have increasing numbers of recipes on there that are the best of the best. And it's immodest, but I trust my recipes more than anybody else's. And I think you can too. I mean, it helps that they're simple. So, um, but we try to do policy. We try to bring forward voices of young food writers who are not getting published elsewhere, but should be. We just try to do a little bit of everything that is around food, and our podcast is similar. We have really good people on that, and that we both enjoy that too. So yeah, thanks for asking about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. The book is Kids Cook Everything, Mark Bittman, Inspiration and Recipes for Making the Food You Love. You've been listening, maybe watching Great Taste, 60 Minutes of Deliciousness. I'm your host, Steve Boss.
Thanks a million, Steve.